You'll get all excited when you boot up Frostpunk 2, and that's because it's riding in on the frosty coattails of its predecessor, the absolute brilliant city builder, where every decision made you feel like the village twat. But there's a problem with Frostpunk 2, and yes, it's still a decent game, but it leaves you colder than a brass monkey's bollocks. It's missing that punch, that soul that made the first one hit deep into your gut. They made some big changes in how you go about slapping together your frozen little city, but it feels like they've cocked it all up, plain and simple. And with these so-called big changes, you'd expect something more, but sadly not enough else has evolved in other areas, leaving you wondering what could have been. So put the kettle on, grab a cuppa, and let's dive into this icy builder that's colder than your ex's heart. Frostpunk 2 is like no other city builder because this one's not just about being in a frozen wasteland, but it's where the dilemmas that your citizens throw your way can ruin their day as well as yours, faster than a rat up a drain pipe. Unlike the first one, where you had a quaint little community of named individuals, each with their own jobs and whatnot, now you've got a population of 8,000 from the get-go. It's like going from managing a little corner pub to running Weatherspoons, and this is a massive shift in direction, but does it actually work? Well, not really, but we're going to get to that later. Now, time don't stop for no one in Frostpunk 2, and neither does the weather. It goes absolutely mental, and you can see the impending doom on a timeline up top. When the cold snap hits, you better hope you've stockpiled enough grub, materials, and most importantly, fuel. Why fuel? Because it powers your heat generator, the lifeblood of your city that sits centre. The closer buildings are the warmest, and of course, as you extend out, it gets colder. Once the fuel runs dry, your population starts dropping like flies, and the worst bit, when the people start freezing their nuts off, they'll turn on you like a crazed Laura Loomer after a few drinks. Before you know it, you're ousted, and yes, it's game over. But that's okay, because Frostpunk 2 is built to make you foul. You're supposed to cock it up again and again, just so you could come back and foul a little bit better next time. No matter how hard you try to balance those resources and get ready for the big freeze, the game's tougher than a Navy SEAL on crack, and it'll have you flat on your ass more times than you can count, where you'll always succumb to the learning curve. And here's where 11-bit studios missed the memo from the original. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Frostpunk, but one of its biggest downers was how little explained in its systems. You were just left there scratching your ass trying to figure it all out, and guess what? Frostpunk 2 somehow makes it even worse. It's like they wanted to drown you in info, but instead they've hidden it behind a million bloody icons and random shapes that flash up on your screen. You're left hovering your cursor over everything like some poor sod at a slot machine hoping for a payout, but even then you'll be lucky if you get half the detail that you actually need. Take building the research centre for example. Now, it tells you it's meant to go in the housing district, right? So you try plonking it there, but nope, no joy. After wasting too much time and googling the answer like a muppet, I realised I needed to put it in a so-called expanded housing district. So with my smooth brain, I figured I'd slap two housing districts together and call that expanded, but no cigar. So then, after squinting at the screen, I spot it, the tiniest bloody icon in existence, letting me expand a district by a few tiles. It's the same with everything else too, leaving you proper hacked off in those first few hours until you somehow muddle through it all. But by far the biggest cock up in Frostpunk 2 is how they've gone and flipped the city building mechanic on its head. But before we dive into that disaster, let's just take a second to remember what made the original so bloody brilliant. First off, it felt like a proper city builder, didn't it? You were in charge of building everything from gathering posts to tents, medical centres, and even the little roads that linked your townsfolk to the resource spots out in the frozen wasteland. You decided who works where, splitting engineers and workers across different jobs, and every single one of them had a name, a place. You could even follow the poor sods around, watching them go about their day. It made things personal. This was your town, your vision, and when everything went tits up, it hit you right in the kahunas, and my hope for the sequel was that they would double down on the building side of things, you know, expanding the structures, making everything more robust and detailed, maybe more like an Anno style game without all the crazy logistics that one has. But instead, they've gone and changed it up completely, and now the whole thing, it feels more like you're playing Civilization than a proper city builder. Now, your city revolves around districts. When you start a new game, whether it's a chapter in the story or the Utopia mode where you can muck about about on one of the maps, your core city is already built for you. That's right, no placing buildings, no making connections, and your population is reduced to nothing more than a statistic. And yeah, I get why they've done it. They want you to focus on one of the strongest bits from the original game, making the tough decisions and enacting laws with different people. But the problem is here, you just don't care anymore. I mean, who gives a toss if a few people snuff it? You've got 8,000 of the buggers to start with, so losing a couple of folks to the cold, it ain't going to ruin your day. And with that comes this creeping sense of boredom. You're no longer crafting your city from the ground up. Instead, you're just slapping districts down on predefined resource spots scattered around the map. It's simple enough. Zoom out, find an icon that represents fuel, materials or food, smash through the ice to access it, and then connect that to your city. The tutorial's about as clear as mud, but eventually you slap an extraction district over the area and boom, you're done. Move on to the next spot and rinse and repeat, all whilst waiting for things to build as you stare aimlessly at the white screen. But it's here you also notice automated robots lugging supplies or train lines magically connecting to your city, and you can't help but feel that you've been a bit mugged off. Like, where did all this tech come from? Did we research it? It's like they've handed you the keys to the kingdom without you earning your badge, and because of that, Frostpunk 2, it just loses some of the grit, some of the soul that made the original so bloody brilliant. But it ain't all bad, of course. As I said earlier, Frostpunk 2 doubles down on one of its best features, the relationships you've got with people and the decisions you're forced to make. Every now and again the game will chuck a dilemma your way, like for example kids having a knife fight in the street, London style, because their parents are dead and no one's around to look after them. So what do? Build child centres to stop the crime but waste valuable resources, or do you tell them to crack on and leave you the alone? In story mode, these kinds of questions come at you non-stop, giving you plenty to chew on, but as I mentioned earlier, with such a massive population, it doesn't hit as hard as it once did in the first game. I never felt like I was really hurting my people the way I used to. That said, this is still a core feature of Frostpunk 2, and one that is executed really well. Another bit I really enjoyed was the different factions you've got lurking around your city. Their favour with you changes depending on what laws you pass, and you can bargain with them, promising to push through other laws in exchange for their backing. Personally, I had it in for the pilgrims. They were only 6% of my population, so they made the perfect scapegoat whenever I needed to shift the blame. Alas, you can't tell the city that the pilgrims are eating your pet cats and dogs, ho hum. Where Frostpunk 2 also drops the ball is in its lack of innovation. Instead of messing around with the city building as much as they did, I wish they'd focused on involving other areas that needed it. Take exploring the map for instance. Just like in the first game, you can send out expeditions beyond your city, and guess what? You'll come across points of interest, and surprise surprise, you'll have to make decisions about them, just like the first game. Some of these choices can be good, some bad, but either way, it feels like a rinse and repeat job from the original. And just like before, most of your efforts are centered on finding valuable upgrades for your Steam generator. That's the main driver again, and same goes for the laws that you pass. Many of them are straight up copy paste from the first game, just slapped with a fresh coat of paint. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently bad with these ideas, but it does feel like they've rested on their laurels a bit, like they haven't pushed the envelope enough to throw new challenges your way. Graphically, I'm torn with Frostpunk 2, and on one hand, I'll admit, it looks bloody stunning at times. The snow drifts in, covering the landscape with textured dunes and hills, and your city, well, it looks like a proper masterpiece with every little detail crafted to perfection. You've got metal bits jutting out of the generator, trains and robots lighting up the highways as they cart goods around. There's real depth to it. Sometimes it's like you're looking at a postcard with this eerily beautiful city that's just been carved out of the rock, fighting for survival in the middle of an icy wasteland. The lighting's solid too, casting just the right amount of gloom to make you feel like things could go tits up at any moment, and the animation's spot on. They really bring your districts to life, adding a bit of character to the otherwise grim setting. Even the art style is bang on, from the menus to the little pictures that pop up when you've got a tough decision to make. Now I've got my issues with the UI, don't get me wrong, like how all the data is hidden behind every icon under the bloody sun, but visually it's clean, concise and does the job pretty well. But of course not everything everything's perfect. Now I've got this running on my beast of a rig and I'm hitting around 60 frames per second at 4K on max settings with frame generation and all the bells and whistles being turned on. So yeah, it runs smooth for me, but I can't help but wonder how it will fare on other setups. All that praise I gave about how the city looks, how it's embedded in rock with the barren wasteland surrounding it, it does come with a catch. First off, these areas are handcrafted. You're not really putting your own stamp on them. You inherit the look, so whilst it's all dressed up and looks the part, it loses a bit of that soul. It's like wearing someone else's suit. You might look sharp, but it ain't yours. That's why Frostpunk 2 looks so good, because it's all so finely tailored to fit that individual landscape. Secondly, and this one really grinds my gears, you can't zoom in as close anymore. Back in the day, you could see your individual citizens going about their business, but now you can barely get up close to the generator, let alone see the little people freezing their tits off. It makes you feel detached from the whole thing, and you're just a bystander watching the chaos unfold from your office rather than being right in the thick of it. So yes, it is a bloody nice looking city builder, but the irony is you can't really see what the city is up to. One thing I absolutely can't fault though, no matter how hard I try, is the sound. Just like the original, Frostpunk 2 delivers a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack, so good even the big shot movie buffs in Hollywood should take note. It perfectly matches the mood of the game, capturing that bleak, desolate atmosphere with a somber tone that gets right under your skin like a football derby match. Honestly, as a standalone soundtrack, it's top tier stuff. Definitely one of the game's standout features. Now the sound effects, I'll admit, they're a bit on the light side, but I reckon that's intentional to let the music steal the show, so I'm not really complaining here. Not that there's anything wrong with them either, mind you. When you click on districts or buildings, you'll hear the clank of metal and all that crap, but there's some great voiceover work in the background when tragedy inevitably strikes, probably because some little shits have had another shanking fight in the streets. All in all, it's a proper treat for the ears, haunting, atmospheric, and quite frankly brilliant. So if I'm being honest then, Frostpunk 2 left me feeling a bit disappointed. I didn't follow the development much, I won't lie, I went in blind, and maybe that's where I went wrong. I expected it to be Frostpunk 1 on steroids, taking us in bold new directions, giving us even more interesting builds to play with, but that's not quite what we got. Now I've seen the early reviews rolling in and it's been getting some stellar praise, so take my opinion with a pinch of salt. I might be the odd one out here in the chorus of raucous applause. It's on Game Pass, so give it a whirl yourself and see what you reckon, but for me, it's missing too much of what made the original so damn good. Sure, game systems can change, mechanics can be tweaked, but what you should never compromise on is the very soul of the game, and sadly, that's exactly what Frostpunk 2 does. Until next time, my lovelies, Reggie out.